And now it's time for this hour's news review. Saudi Arabia is pushing ahead with its deadly campaign of airstrikes on Yemeni cities. The latest Saudi airstrikes hit an area near the Yemeni city of Sa'ada. Yemeni media say the attack killed a civilian and injured another. Saudi Arabia launched a devastating war on its southern neighbor in 2015 to reinstate a friendly government there. That objective has not been achieved, but hundreds of thousands of Yemenis have been killed in the persisting Saudi attacks. I'd like to welcome my guests to this news review. Jim Kavanagh, writer and political commentator out of New York, and Elijah Magnier, journalist and political analyst out of Brussels. Thank you both for being with me. Well, let's start it off with Jim. Jim, we're continually talking about the situation in Yemen. And once again, Saudi Arabia continues with its aggression. Do you think that the United States, if they told Saudi Arabia today to stop attacking Yemen, that it would, or is it something that the Saudis themselves are deciding to do?
Well, I think the Saudis are doing it on their own initiative, but I think it would be impossible to do without American support. The Americans definitely need to be a patron of this war. You know, Joe Biden came into the presidency declaring that he would end all military aid, all aid to the war, to Saudi's war in Yemen, but he didn't. And they just passed a $500 million package that includes money for the Saudi attack helicopters. So that's gone by the wayside, and the United States is supporting the war, is supporting Saudi Arabia in this war. And the Saudis could not do this without American support. I believe that. I think they have their own reasons for doing it, which are kind of dissipated in the last few. This war has gone on now for 7 years, longer than World War II. And, the Saudis thought this was going to be a quick victory that would enhance their credibility as a military power in the region, and it's turned out to be anything but that. But the United States does not want to see them defeated either. So the Americans are a crucial element and a necessary support of the Saudis in this war.
Elijah, your perspective, you heard what Jim said, that yes, the United States supports the Saudis in this. What exactly, from a strategic perspective, what do you think Washington is gaining from this? 7 years on, almost 7 years now, that this has been taking place. Hundreds of thousands of people killed and displaced in that country. And of course, we see the Yemeni military being very effective these days in fighting back. What is the United States trying to gain, and what have they gained, if anything, during these 7 years so far?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
I think the most important point is that we all agree that this is not only a Saudi-led military intervention into the Yemen crisis and war. It is United States and the United Kingdom that are offering military and intelligence support. It is Germany, France, Italy, Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom who are offering weapons, and there are civilian contractors in Saudi Arabia who are looking after all the Saudi planes that are waging war on Yemen. So we understand that the Saudis cannot execute a full maritime blockade on Yemen without the support of the United States. That takes us to one conclusion, that the United States is the principal player in this war and is insisting on continuing this war. Now, what are the reasons? It's because the Yemeni are rejecting the Saudi hegemony, they are rejecting the US dominance over the country, and they own a very strategic area on the sea that is vital to the US and to Israel. And what they fear is there is a new member of the Axis of the Resistance that has joined all the countries that reject the US hegemony and want to live under the rule of the population and not under the US dictate and all its allies. The main problem is not having a country that's saying no to the Americans and can represent a certain danger to the Israeli freedom of navigation and war ship navigating in that part of the world. So I think it is a combination of many things, really.
Well, Jim, if what Elijah is saying is true, and this is another addition to the resistance, wouldn't you think with the continually bombardment of Yemen and also basically a blockade on the territory for years, that as a matter of fact, with what they're doing, they're actually pushing the Yemeni people more towards the resistance, because then it's the only way. They have nothing else. When bombs are falling over their heads and they don't have access to food and water, what other choice do they have?
Well, you make a good point. I think early on in 2015, when this first started, the Houthi-led movement was not necessarily going to be such a threat to Saudi Arabia or the Americans. We didn't know. But now it's clearly developed in such a way that they know what side they're on in the kind of regional and global situation. And, Saudi Arabia, as I said, I think got into this thinking they would just push, get their way very quickly. And because they haven't, and because the credibility of the Saudi regime under Mohammed bin Salman is now under, at stake in this, they can't afford a loss, and the Americans don't want them to afford a loss. At this point, the victory of the Houthi-led rebels in Yemen would be probably almost certainly lead to a new member of the Axis of Resistance, and it would be very threatening to the Saudi regime itself. But the failure in this would be devastating. And what you're going to have is, of course, the Saudis are going to depend on air power and naval power and bombing because they can't afford to lose soldiers, and they're not going to have a lot of, they don't do well when it comes to putting soldiers into play. And the Houthis have been successful. There's fighting over Marib, which is really one of the last strongholds of the Saudi governmental forces, and it's an important thing. So, it's a danger. It's become a dangerous situation for the Americans and the Israelis and the Saudis in a way that it didn't have to be, I think, at the outset. But they find a way of turning something into a problem for them, a much bigger problem than it could have been.
Well, Elijah, we've entered another year. Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel this year for the Yemeni people? Because as our other guest, Jim, has just talked about Marib and the victories by the Yemeni people, the Yemeni military, how likely do you see this conflict coming to an end soon?
Indeed, I see a very good outcome for Yemen, because we can see that the Ansarullah Houthis are liberating a big part of their country. They will definitely take Marib, and they are heading toward the borders. We're talking about Najran and all the territory that was disputed with Saudi Arabia, and they are really imposing themselves as the leader of the country. At the end of the day, the Saudis are losing the war. They just gained the destruction of Yemen, and now they have to reconstruct it once the war is finished and stopped. So what we see, why I see it positive, is because I see that the Houthi gaining more territory, liberating more areas, defeating Al-Qaeda and ISIS that are fighting inside the city of Marib and elsewhere, as the Saudis and their allies brought them to stand against the Houthis. So we suddenly see all these terrorist groups fighting in Yemen, and the Americans closing an eye on them, and they support Saudi Arabia almost legally. So that's why this cannot continue, and they will be defeated, and the Houthi will win. And this is why I see a positive outcome, because after 6 or 7 years of war, the Saudis, with all the big coalition that are supporting this war, have failed to achieve their objectives.
And on that note, I'd like to thank both of you for being with me on this news review. Jim Kavanagh, writer and political commentator out of New York. Elijah Magnier, journalist and political analyst out of Brussels. I'd like to thank you, viewers, for being with us on another news review. Thanks so much.